I've been rewriting the start of this video a few times and I'm still not entirely sure what to say. The confirmed suicide of Desmond Amofa, also known as Etika, on Tuesday has given me a lot to think about with regards to mental health and how content creators are perceived by the world they create content for. But I think it's important to remember what Etika gave us. I never followed his work obsessively, but I knew he was a vibrant character with a natural talent for entertainment, and I do have some seriously fond memories of seeing him react with such genuine excitement to Smash Bros reveals. Things haven't been okay with him for a while, but above all else, I'm gonna remember the energy and warmth he gave back to the community, and I hope that ultimately becomes his legacy. But Etika is also a tragic case study into the stresses of being a content creator and how mentally taxing this profession can be at times. I almost don't want to mention this now because I feel like the focus should be on Etika, but seeing as these issues contributed to his death, it would be irresponsible of me to not talk about them. Having a large active audience is daunting at times, and there's a danger of losing yourself in the constant push for internet relevance, and the need to be on at all times. Ultimately, views and subscribers don't matter as much as how you feel about yourself and the world around you. To that, I'd say to anyone out there making content, and really it applies to everyone else too, surround yourself with people you can talk to. Not necessarily about YouTube or your day job or whatever, just people you can have random discussions with. And ultimately, try to be kind to each other. It's not hard and can actually be kind of fun. Mental health is unbelievably important, and I'm hoping it doesn't take another suicide for people to realize this. Rest in peace, Etika, you've gone way too soon. I think we always want to get the most out of every game we play. It's easy to play a game for a bit and discard it in favour of something more exciting, but I've always had the mindset of wanting to arrive at a satisfying ending from every game I play. Sometimes this is impossible because depressingly downbeat games make up a fair chunk of my library, but sometimes it's just really fucking hard. There's a lot of developers out there that make the normal ending very easy to get, but hide significantly more intriguing and interesting optional endings behind some very hefty requirements. It's like microtransactions, but with time and effort. Those devious bastards. But what do you classify as an ending? I mean, it's not a hard word to understand, but for example, I wouldn't describe the crappy postcard you get from completing Super Mario Sunshine as any kind of ending. This is all about optional conclusions that can only be accessed by running the gauntlet and being rewarded with a cutscene or two that only somewhat justifies the torturous pain you endure to get there. For the record, I generally don't consider endings that take a while to unlock as all that tricky to obtain, since I'm under the impression that everyone has infinite free time to play a game for hours on end and definitely not watch my YouTube videos instead. Don't worry, I'd probably do the same. I'm thinking that endings are the most valuable thing you can unlock in a game because potentially it can provide extra closure to a story that is lacking it without this optional ending. And yeah, there's the argument of why would you hide something so important this well, but it might make it more satisfying that way. Just so long as you like endings with an extra dose of a big old sigh of relief. Any game with multiple endings can be pretty asinine to get on top of. The push for player choice and having one hand on the wheel has increased replayability for a lot of franchises out there, but it's also increased the amount of time and effort required to see everything there is to see. So it stands to reason that any game that has multiple endings and then one final true ending that unlocks once you've seen everything else is quite the undertaking and kind of agonizing if this scenario exists in a game that isn't so great. Though, maybe if you're willing to play through every path in Shadow the Hedgehog, you care enough to look past this game's many, many flaws. Greater men than me have failed to do that in the past. It's very easy to forget with Shadow the Hedgehog that behind the fundamental issue of a Sonic game with edgy themes and guns, there are multiple other problems like a broken physics engine and a hilariously convoluted story made up of player choice that gives you a whole bunch of endings that I kind of don't really care about. This is an interesting idea in a fun game. In a not so fun game though, it's less so. I think even in a really good game, having a system like Shadow the Hedgehog's would start to grate after a while. In order to reach the true ending, you have to play this game to completion 10 times before one final ending becomes available to you. By completing hero, dark, or normal missions in each level, you can shift Shadow's alignment up and down and maybe reach an ending that gives you meaning in your life and answers the question of, hey, why am I playing this instead of literally any other game? Without a guide and a clear understanding of where you are on this ending chart and what you need to get next, this is a hell of a lot of work for an ending that, yes, ties things up in a nice neat little bow, but does also flatten out some of the complexity that Sonic Team were trying to inject into Shadow's character. He's less like an anti-hero in the true ending and more like a traditional protagonist doing a job that anyone else could have done. It's especially weird that such a bland ending comes after spending a long time exploring all the possible extremes to Shadow's alignment and potentially resenting the time you've spent on this game. Don't worry, not every game on this list has a difficult optional ending that I kind of hate. Sometimes I like putting effort into video games. Speaking of player choice, Mass Effect is goddamn obsessed with it, and before I even played these games, I assumed they were shooters first and RPGs second, but honestly, it's kind of the other way around, and that's really interesting. It's such a unique blend of story-driven actions influenced by the player in a way that feels genuinely engaging, and so naturally, you'd expect the final moments of any game like this to really capitalize on this. And yeah, sort of? For a start, it does depend on which Mass Effect you're playing, since I don't need to remind anyone watching this that the third game didn't really know what it was doing for the last half an hour of story, and sort of tripped over itself and jizzed out a different coloured explosion depending on a button press. That's quite sad, but luckily Mass Effect 2 had the right way of approaching it by giving you one final mission to tackle in the game, and a huge number of possibilities within that mission. You have your motley crew of big personalities that you've grown to care for throughout your journey, and now you're going to watch on as you make poor decisions and they all start dying one after the other. Wait, hold on. I really like the suicide mission at the end of Mass Effect 2 for being this appropriately grand test of your abilities, and competency for knowing which member of your team is best suited for which role. The problem is that the margin for error is really small sometimes, and characters will die very quickly for mistakes that don't necessarily feel like mistakes at the time. Typically, there's a special ending available should you make it to the other side of the suicide mission with everyone still alive. The problem is working out how to tiptoe your way through an hour of keeping multiple plates spinning and making sure no one dies from the multitude of threats and problems that are around every corner. The awkward thing is that the true ending is simultaneously optional and also the standout canonical ending, so if you want to experience Mass Effect 2 to the fullest, you either need to pay attention to every minute detail or, you know, be a pussy and use a guide instead. I almost wouldn't blame you, but I didn't. Just meant I got to listen to that sweet soundtrack a few dozen times. I can think of worse ways to spend an afternoon. No one will ever truly know what's happening within the intricate workings of Yoko Taro's mind. The man's a genius, and like every genius, he's batshit insane, and we're lucky he's making games because otherwise I fear he might have ended up in prison for doing something really weird with a robot. Having played Nier Automata into the ground, I would really like to pursue the Drakengard games and the original Nier at some point, since they seem to have similarly ambitious themes and striking visuals that make you pause and think, wow, someone thought this up and put this into a video game for me to play, and here I am eating onion rings in my underwear, and yet the profound beauty has not been lost on me, Mr. Taro, I understand you. But Nier Automata is pretty wild. It's even got 26 endings to tackle, and most of them are fucking stupid. The joke endings typically exist as a reward for the enterprising player who attempts stupid things like self-destructing in the bunker or killing friendly robots, but there's one ending that is far more complicated than that. Still kind of a joke ending, but with extra stuff. Ending Y, also known as Heady Battle, sees you run errands for Emil, the weird head thing that you meet some way into the game, which might be Yoko Taro's actual head. There's no way of knowing for sure. At some point you need to find and upgrade every single weapon in the game, which is a fairly hefty undertaking on its own, but not out of the wheelhouse of any dedicated player. And actually this step is super important because Emil will become a giant super boss that you need to now defeat. He is level 99, and if you're not close to that, you're going to have a hard time staying alive long enough to defeat Emil and his many heads. It's an emotional fight really, since it pays homage back to Emil's role in the first Nier, but that's not what we're here for. At some point, Emil will initiate a self-destruct sequence, which is exactly what you want, since this is what destroys the entire planet, killing all life, but, crucially, triggers ending Y and gives you the most complicated ending in the whole game. Problem is that you might not know this and might stop it, and if you haven't saved beforehand, you're a little fucked. Ultimately, you don't get ending Y for defeating Emil, you get it for letting him explode, and if you don't know that beforehand, it's not gonna go well. Do you want to go through all that shit again and fight a difficult boss just for an extra letter to your collection of endings? Of course I do, you don't know me! Hey, it's this or trying to do ending E offline and just, I'd rather fight giant heads all day. That's not even a question, come on. What you might be working out at this point is that strategy guides can solve everything. If an ending is difficult to obtain because of a need for a set of parameters to be in place, you just look it up online and find numerous solutions that will spell the answer out for you as clear as day. And that's fine, I have no issue with that, but all that does is make me want to look at endings that are difficult to reach even when you know what you need to do. Don't worry, those exist and usually take the form of some kind of crazy endgame challenge that 1% of players will take on, and even fewer will beat and see the fruits of their labours and be mildly disappointed that so much effort went into something so underwhelming. Cave Story is the best part of 15 years old now, and I have to remind myself of this fact on a regular basis because it was actually way ahead of its time in multiple really interesting ways. Like the bullshit optional final level of terror and sadness to reach the true ending. That's my favourite one. It seems like there's a lot of 2D platformers out there that like to focus on precision platforming and bouncing back instantly from a very quick death and continuing on regardless, which is why, perhaps, there are so many bonus levels with a million spikes in them and barely any checkpoints. Cave Story is the originator of a lot of this, and naturally, it's home to one of the craziest final levels you're ever likely to see. There is so much death to be found in this level, holy fucking goddamn! So much death. Nowadays, with games like Celeste and Hollow Knight in the public consciousness, Cave Story feels like it's from a different era of time entirely, and yet the Blood-Stained Sanctuary is a stark reminder that this game is more than capable of ruining your goddamn life. Supposedly, this area came about because the original playtesters for Cave Story suggested that something should be added onto the very end of the game to give the player one final challenge to wrestle with. I fear they may have gone too far, because what awaits you is a large area full of very tricky platforming segments and a bunch of enemies throwing themselves at you with no end. And then the ceiling is falling down and little angels are launching a hail of arrows at you, and sometimes a YouTuber will remind you to subscribe to his channel and hit bells for notifications, and I'm like, get the fuck off my screen, RabbidLuigi, there's a billion angels in front of me, ah fuck, I died. I blame you! Hey, it's fine, there's a creepy final boss at the end with 4 stages to his fight, and no checkpoints in between here and the very start of the Blood-Stained Sanctuary. That's cool, that's really, really cool, guys. Those fucking playtesters, man, giving everyone more work to do. I've always been under the impression that anyone with enough time, skill, and patience can achieve anything in a video game. You only have to look at the dedication of speedrunners out there to constantly push a game to its limits, both natural and unnatural, and repeatedly rewrite expectations for how fast a game can be beaten. It honestly doesn't matter how many barriers you put up in front of an optional ending, people will throw themselves at it until it comes down and they get what they want. Which is why I think the most difficult optional endings aren't to be found somewhere where you're relying on one person doing something really difficult, they're to be found where you need lots of people doing something quite simple. Because damn, we do not play nicely with others. Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain was ambitious in a lot of different ways and in a lot of different areas, often in ways that put series creator Hideo Kojima at odds with Konami. So much so that an entire chapter of content was maybe kinda sort of cut from the final game, depends on who you ask. It does mean that this game has a bit of an abrupt ending, which I never really liked since it had too much shock value for me to really accept that this is how The Phantom Pain was always likely to end. And that's very interesting because there is an extra hidden ending to this game that can be unlocked when all the nukes in the game are disarmed. Something that isn't very difficult to do on your own, but you also have to rely on every other player on your regional server to disarm all of their nukes too, which is likely hundreds if not thousands of nukes. And that takes a hell of a lot of coordination. I don't need to tell you what a tall order this is. It's in fact such a tall order that it's only happened 5 times across all platforms since the game first came out in 2015. But even then, it seems suspiciously glitchy. You've got nuke counts dropping from 3,500 to 0 in the space of 1 day, and all platforms crashed to the ground in an outburst of peace and love on Christmas Day last year, when all of the nukes magically and coincidentally disappeared at the same time. I'm not saying there were shenanigans involved, but I am saying that this is a bunch of bullshit and this cutscene has never been triggered in a legitimate way. And that's a shame, because it's a heartfelt plea from Kaz Miller and Venom Snake to take the finger off the nuke button and find a way to solve problems without blowing each other into a different time period. Why Kojima or Konami felt the need to hide such an interesting ending behind a set of circumstances that were virtually impossible to bring together is a mystery that we may never solve. It's beautiful and yet virtually impossible to reach. A pretty fitting allegory for this game in general sometimes. This has been RabbidLuigi, and the only question that remains here is whether or not this ending is an actual ending or not, and that really does depend on personal preference, but to me, it is, because the finality of this cutscene acts as a conclusion to what a lot of these characters have been working towards in this game. And in a way, it's actually a happier ending than the one we get as official canon. It's almost an unrealistically optimistic ending, like Hideo Kojima and Konami knew what they were doing by giving such a ridiculous set of rules to get this ending, because disarming all the nukes is kinda crazy and unrealistic. It's like art imitating reality, in a way. Have you got a topic that you'd like me to talk about next week? Make sure you leave a comment about that down below, because I'll be taking the most interesting suggestions and making a poll on the next video. In fact, here's one right now that I prepared from last week. I'll be revealing the winner of the poll on Twitter and taking suggestions for games to talk about that are related to that topic. So feel free to follow me over there so we can keep in touch. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.